Facepalm America. I'm Beowulf Rockland. FacepalmAmerica.com is where you can get more information on the show, listen to past episodes, and connect with us on social media if you choose to do so. America is in a difficult situation these days. It faces a lot of challenges from abroad, from within. The very idea of democracy is being questioned by a lot of people within our borders. And we have great powers around the world, such as China, who are challenging U.S. as a superpower. And I don't know, it's a very interesting place, because when I grew up, it used to be kind of unquestioned that the U.S. was at the top of the heap. And I think we have to ask ourselves, are we in a position to keep ourselves there? Do we deserve to be there? Are we ready to meet the challenges? And we have to do a lot of soul searching, frankly, before we can figure out whether we're going to keep going the way we have been into the rest of the 21st century. And somebody who has been asking those questions and thinking about them very deeply is Dan Baer. He is the author of The Four Tests. Dan Baer is a senior vice president for policy research and director of the Europe program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He served in Governor John Hickenlooper's cabinet as executive director for the Colorado Department of Higher Education. And under President Obama, he was U.S. ambassador to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Dan Baer, welcome to Facepalm America. Thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be here.
So where would you assess where we are? Because, as our opening music indicated to a certain extent, I think we're slowing down. We're not quite in the same place that we were. We faced some challenges, and a lot of them have been put in place by ourselves. I think we took some serious missteps as an international power in the wake of 9/11 that we still haven't fully recovered from. How would you assess where we are right now in 2023?
I think you're right in some ways, but as I understand your meaning of slowing down, but the world is speeding up in many ways.
Yes.
And so we face kind of a twin challenge. In fact, the world is becoming more difficult, and more difficult not just because of certain rising actors, but also just because of the progress of technology, the fact that the global economy has become more integrated and therefore more competitive. And I agree with you that there were steps taken. I mean, I think the Iraq War, the legacy of the Iraq War in terms of the way that it has affected us internally, as well as our reputation abroad, is long and still with us. It was a disastrous foreign policy mistake that has long consequences. But I think those consequences are really accentuating a trend that was already destined to happen, which is to say that, we had a really unusual moment at the end of the Cold War where the United States was unparalleled, unchallenged as the sole superpower in the world, and where we still made up an enormous percentage of the global economy. And so we had enormous economic power. And largely, when there was a global challenge, we didn't even have to coerce. We would say, this is how we're going to face it. And we could count on enough countries getting in line behind that. That has changed. And it's changed, we are a power that is in relative, not absolute, but relative decline because of the rise of other powers. And obviously the kind of contest for global leadership has become more intense. It's not a given that what America says goes. And so what I think lies in front of us is a question about whether we will meet this moment by trying to renew American leadership in the world. And I think the only way we renew American leadership in the world is by renewing our strength at home. And that means living up to some of the things that we've never lived up to in the past in terms of the kind of principles on which we were founded.
Yeah, those founding principles have always been in question, and they've always been challenged by what could politely be considered pragmatism. And there are a lot of times in our country where they've just haven't played out altogether. And that combined with the fact that in the last few years we've had a president who has completely, alienated us from broad swaths of the world, we're in a place where we really need to reassess what we need to be doing. So how do we go about making that assessment?
Well, I mean, I think we start with the world as it is, and we try to recognize, one of the challenges we have is, I mean, first of all, there's a nostalgia which was part of Trumpism.
Right.
There's a different kind of nostalgia that other people feel that are not necessarily Trump supporters for a time when we believed that America was much more of a leader in the world, and I think there's a grain of truth in that. But I think we have to remember that the time for which many people have a nostalgia is a time in which white men dominated
Yeah.
every aspect of American society. When people will complain about the rise of social media, but the condition of the information space in the 1960s or 70s was that all of America effectively got their news from five white guys who were on the broadcast TV channels, and so everything we knew was mediated by a certain small set of people. So there's been some democratization of information since then.
Very true, and it's interesting. I'm rereading William Manchester's Death of a President, and I'm realizing the extent to which pretty much all the information that came out of there, and over the next successive days after November 22nd, 1963, came through, Walter Cronkite, David Brinkley, and this very small set of people. It was a very different media landscape, and probably not one that we want to go back to, because that's so centrally controlled.
Yes, and obviously the if you looked at the makeup of Congress back then, if you looked at who was staffing governments at the state, local, or federal level, like it was one part of one half of American society, and so we don't. I guess my main point here is not to kind of relitigate the past, although it's obviously important to be a student of history, but more that we're not trying to go back to normal. There's only forward to normal, and it's forward to a place that we've never been before. And one of the things that I think, as much as I find many aspects of this moment depressing, if we can get this moment right, we really unlock something that's quite beautiful, morally beautiful. If we can actually create a stable foundation for a pluralistic, multi-ethnic, liberal democracy, it will be the first time that we have successfully done that, actually, as our country. And it'll be the first time, arguably, that any country in the world, certainly any country at the scale and diversity that we have, has succeeded at that. And that will be real moral progress as well as human and economic progress for Americans. So I think your question about what do we have to do right now, I mean, the good news is we've been here before multiple times where the world changes. And so we have to change the way that we organize ourselves, both to be competitive in the world and also to take care of each other and make sure that we each can make our way in the world and make a life of our own meaning. And so we have a bunch of adaptation that we have to do, and that's hard work that we have to do together.
So if we're not going back to the past, if we're going forward to a new normal, if we're going to the U.S. as a global power in a true sense of inclusion and equity and in equality and balance, what does that look like in fundamental ways that was different from what the U.S. as a superpower looked like in the past?
Well, I think the U.S. as a superpower in the past, first of all, most people think of it as the time of the most recent memories, of course, during the Cold War. And obviously the world was bifurcated then. It was a bipolar world with a non-aligned movement, a large group of countries who were nominally not aligned with either of the two superpowers. But the economic relationships between the two spheres of the superpowers were much thinner than they are today globally. So it's actually much harder. We don't have the option of kind of creating, or it would be extremely expensive and have huge negative consequences for human welfare if we tried to kind of recreate a bipolar world. Right. So it's a very difficult, that would be a very difficult proposition. I think what we're trying to do going forward is, I guess what I think we need to do in order to move forward is spend much more time investing in people in the United States, partly because the decline of, and this is not you can make all of these arguments based on social and economic justice reasons, that it's unfair that we have a system that leaves out a large number of Americans, an education system that leaves out a large number of Americans, that a large number of Americans don't have the economic security to be able to go to work if they wanted to go to work, that healthcare you can make the argument that healthcare is a human right, that in a country as rich as the United States, nobody should be poor, et cetera. Those are all social and economic justice arguments. You can also make it from a practical standpoint that if the United States is going to compete in the world, including competing against a number of other large countries that have much larger populations than we do, then we need every American off the bench. We need to invest in people so that all Americans are being productive, so that all Americans are able to help America as a whole be a competitive actor in the world and to maintain America's influence in the world. And that's not just because there's some kind of football game style competition, but it's because we believe that it is important for America to have influence in the world in order to protect our way of life, in order to protect a liberal democratic society, and that of our partners and allies who share a commitment to human rights and fundamental freedoms and things that make it possible for us to make lives of our own choosing.
Yeah, because frankly, although I have many, many criticisms of the United States of America, I happen to think that we've come closer than most other places to achieving the ideals that we purport to believe in than most other places have. And you're very right about fairness, and you're right about, and I think so much of that has to do from a corporate perspective, I think, especially because we're so influenced by corporations in this country, and the bulwarks against those, or the restrictor plates, the walls of the engine that contain that and make corporations productive, I think, have become weaker and weaker and weaker over the course of time. And to me, from my perspective, a lot of that has to do with short-term thinking. We're looking to the next, financial quarter, as opposed to looking to the next decade or looking to the next generation, both in terms of our place in the world and also in terms of how are we taking care of our environment, which is in itself another pressing problem, and developing long-term thinking and how that plays out in terms of how we treat people and how we make their lives, livable from day to day, I think is really key. We've got to stop living on the nervous, desperate, edge of reality and thinking, oh, I just got to squeeze this little last bit of productivity out. We've got to think about how is this going to play out in the future, because we're going to live in the future, not just in this single moment. And I think powers such as China are definitely thinking about that, and we're doing it less so.
I think there's been I agree, and part of the book talks about the need to kind of restore genuine competition in the American economy, which is to say fair competition, not where the economy is rigged in favor of corporate power or large economic actors. But I think there's a general kind of theory of how you manage a society and how you try to support an economy and how you regulate an economy that we have tried for the last several decades, arguably since 1980 or thereabouts, which is run it as hot as you can and tweak it so that it's always running at full speed. And one of the things that we've learned in recent years, whether that's because of the pandemic or the financial crisis, is that when you operate that way, you're operating as if you never need to be resilient, as if there's never going to be a shock. And that actually building in some resilience, building in some cushion, building in the ability for people to rebuild their lives and not be living on the precipice, so that if they have an accident that costs $400, all of a sudden they are in a death spiral financially and end up defaulting their mortgage and then losing their home and et cetera, things like that, that you actually will be more productive and more successful over time. This is not a concession to productivity. It's that our economy, because it is so integrated with the global economy, because we are increasingly dependent upon each other in a technologically advanced economy, we need to care more about how each other is doing. We will ourselves as individuals be more resilient if our neighbors are also more resilient too. And so investing in that kind of societal resilience is a recipe for economic success, not a concession that we are making.
Yeah. And I think we should have learned a lesson, if we didn't, from what happened during the pandemic. I mean, it was horrible in so many different ways, the toll on human life and the impact on the economy in addition to that. But the phenomenon, I think, that not as many people knew before that was just-in-time production. And supply chains. And to me, that said that we are absolutely, like, as you say, like running at top capacity, like just on the edge, like don't set any margins aside in case something happens.